Hi there, welcome back to another watercolor tutorial. My name is Erin Eno, and today we are painting quick and easy clouds using 3 different methods. So as usual, before we start, I'll just quickly run through my materials. I've got Baohong Academy watercolor paper, which is 100% cotton cold pressed. I have Van Gogh paints in my palette. I have a jar of water, paper towel handy. I also have a facial tissue for this one. And for brushes, I'm using a Princeton Snap 1-inch wash and a size 12 round. Okay, so let's get painting. So you'll have to excuse me, my water is slightly blue because I was doing some clouds, but it's okay. So for the first method, I'm just going to put down a wash of blue, and not a wash, sorry, water, because I'm using cerulean blue for this because it makes a really nice sky color. If you don't have it, just use whatever light blue you have and like for a sky color. But I find with the cerulean blue, it's so intense that it tends to stain the paper. So I just don't want this to be really streaky. So I'm just going to try to get a nice even wash. And you have to work fairly quickly for this method. So we've got our light blue sky. And then before this settles in to the paper too much, I'm going to take my facial tissue, I'm going to bunch it up, and I'm just going to dab and pick up paint and make our clouds. Like so. And that's all there is to this method. And you can make them, big and puffy, or long and kind of streaky. But try not to overwork it, because you'll find that there's kind of no going back. But it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. And there are 2 clouds for method number 1. Now for method number 2, I also want a wash, and I'm not going to wet this one first. I'm just going to, because I don't want this method, or don't want the paper to be sopping wet for this method. So hopefully I can get a reasonably non-streaky sky. So I'm going to tilt my pad to do this. So I just kind of keep that water, or keep the paint flowing and avoid streaks. That's the plan. Anyway. Okay, so we've got a nice even coverage. Like so. Actually, I'll bring it down just a little bit more. And the reason I don't want this sopping wet is because we're going to use water to make the clouds. So it's basically the principle of blooms, which I'm sure you've had and I'm sure you've been mad about. But in this case, we want the blooms, because the blooms are actually going to be the clouds. Okay, so I'm going to let that sit for just a little bit, because I don't want it sopping wet. Okay, and I'm going to clean off my brush, and I'm going to wet the bottom portion, because for method number 3, I want a wet, not sopping wet, I want a damp background. So I'm going to just put water on this so it can sit and kind of soak in while we're working on method 2. Because I want this just to be a nice sheen, kind of, by the time we get to painting on it. Hopefully that's what I'll get. We'll see if that happens. Might be my lucky day. Okay, so we can go into method number 2, and with the round brush, I'm just going to clean it off a bit. And then I'm going to get off the excess water just by dragging it along the mouth of my jar. I don't want it sopping wet. And I'm just going to go and start tapping in water where I want my clouds to be. Okay, and that should bloom out because there's more water on my brush than there is on the paper. Now, because these are blooms, you don't want to do this on a big painting because you can't do or control a big massive bloom. It's just not going to work, but this is good for smaller paintings. And it is a more subtle way of doing clouds. So if that's what you're looking for, this is kind of a handy method to have and work on. And how much it blooms out is going to be dependent on a few things. Your paper, how much pigment you've got down on your paper, and also how long it's been sitting, like how dry or wet your paper is, okay? Because you've got to make sure, like ideally I would have let this sit a little bit longer because your paper definitely needs to be drier than the water you're putting on top of it. So with this method, the clouds are a lot more subtle, but you can also do like long kind of streaky clouds. I don't want to go into those clouds, but if you just draw just lines, that will bloom out and just give you some nice long streaky clouds. Okay. So if you find that it's not blooming enough or you're not patient enough to wait, I like to go in and just clean my brush off, take off the excess moisture from my brush, and then just go in and start lifting some of that pigment out. Like I said, these are more subtle clouds, but it's nice to do this just to get some highlights and lowlights on your clouds, just to add some interest to them. So just keep cleaning your brush off on your paper towel and pick up pigment just to get some lighter spots and shadows on your clouds, like so. Okay. And that's it for method number 2. Just remember this one when you want like nice subtle clouds. It's kind of handy. So for method number 3, I think we're ready to go in now. It's just got a nice sheen to it, which is what we want. And we're going to make clouds out of the negative space. So we're basically drawing the sky around the clouds, and where we don't paint is going to be our clouds. Okay, so I want soft edges, which is why I wet the paper first, but I don't want them to bloom or to bleed like all willy-nilly and crazy. So I'm going to take off the excess water off my brush and just go into the paint, and you just start painting the cloud shape that you want, like so. So that's going to continue to bleed, which is why you don't want it sopping wet, or it'll start to bleed too much. But it's got to be wet enough to bleed. And if it's not, in some areas, it's not a big deal, because you can always go in and kind of just add water to that edge with a clean brush and just kind of kiss that edge of the line that you just put in, and that should feather out and bleed. Okay, and then for the background, just make sure that you keep it wet and you keep the paint moving, or you'll just get a streaky blue background, which is not ideal unless that's what you want. And then if you find it bleeding too much, which I feel it's bleeding too much, it means I didn't wait long enough for the water to soak in, but that's okay. You can fix that. So just take your brush, clean it off in your water, dry it off on your paper towel, and just pick up some of that moisture to slow that bleed down. Kind of like this hard edge on this one, but I'll soften it up just a tad. Okay. So that is method 2. You could also go in and, you know, put in some shading on these clouds, but just be careful not to overwork it. Like I could just go in and put a light, you know, wash of blue in some of the areas, like so. And then just go in, dry off your paper towel, or dry off your brush, and just kind of soften that up. Just so your cloud's not just stark white. Okay, so that is method number 3. So there you are. There are 3 quick and easy ways to do watercolor clouds. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that you found it helpful. If you have any questions or feedback, please let me know in the comments section below. And if you want to see more beginner-friendly tutorials, please make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when I have new videos up. And also, if you do try my tutorials, please post your work on Instagram and tag me on them so I can see what you guys are coming up with. So that's it for today, guys. Take care, and I hope to see you soon.